Journalist Sidney J. Harris once said, "If you treat someone under your control like a dog, he will react like a dog. Treat him like an animal, and he will respond like an animal. Treat him as an object of content, and he will become filled with a self-content that must sooner or later erupt in rage, hate, and violence." This quote acts as a great description of what the United States prison system does to inmates. It is no secret that inmates live in overcrowded cells with violence that occurs between inmates and guards. Some people will argue that these atrocious living conditions are justified as part of the punishment for the inmates, but this line of thinking is very harmful because the inmates' behavior upon release would be a direct reflection of the conditions they were subjected to while in prison. Surely we're all familiar with the notion that we are a product of our environment. This means that when we force these inmates into cramped and dirty cells like wild animals into kennels, the resulting behavior of the inmates will be in response to these conditions. It can include aggressive behavior and failing to successfully re-enter society upon release. In order to reduce the United States' high reincarceration rate, serious modifications need to be made to the prison system that provide more programs to inmates while in prison and upon release that focus on the inmate engaging in more positive behavior versus being punished. The U.S.'s high reincarceration rate is a reflection of the poor conditions inmates are forced to live in while in prison and the lack of services to aid inmates in bettering themselves while in prison and upon release. This increases the risk of inmates reverting back to criminal behavior. Lowering the reincarceration rate of recently released inmates has been found to be the product of providing educational programs to inmates and encouraging visitations. In a 2017 USA Today article, Eileen Rivers acknowledges that restrictions, corruption, and limited educational and drug rehab services help ensure that more than 75% of prisoners return to the system within 5 years of release in America. As a result of prisons in the United States treating inmates poorly, and the prison system not having enough high-quality services readily available to inmates, the U.S. witnesses a large quantity of released individuals go back to a life of crime. There are two leading factors that result in this reincarceration. The first factor is the conditions inmates are forced to live in and the way they are treated while in prison. And the second factor is the programs and services, or lack thereof, that are offered to inmates leading up to and upon their release from prison. By having inmates live for months to years in inhumane living conditions, with extremely crowded cells that house more inmates than they should, and dirty facilities, then these inmates are taught that they don't deserve better than they are currently receiving in prison. This can result in inmates adopting new habits as a way of coping with this new living situation. For example, inmates may learn to dismiss the filth they live in, which could result in them continuing to partake in unsanitary behavior upon release. Also, inmates may adopt a tougher persona in prison in an attempt to dissuade any harassment. And this persona, which always has to be on guard and aggressive in order to dissuade this harassment, may turn into an actual part of their personality that they can just switch off upon release. Furthermore, beyond the physical problems on the living situations in the U.S.'s prison system, there are also mental side effects. The interactions that inmates have with both guards and their fellow inmates have an effect on how they behave upon release. In a 2019 HuffPost article, Laura Patterson wrote that Norway has learned that by using dynamic security, which encourages positive interactions between prisoners and staff to build a more respectful and therefore safer environment inside the prison. By using this dynamic security, the country has been able to lower the number of individuals who are reincarcerated in that country recently upon being released from prison. While there are services in place to help inmates, they don't always provide the services that are most beneficial to the direct needs of inmates. In a 2018 The Crime Report article, Stephen Stewart included the fact that the RAND Corporation found that when used with other effective programs, such as drug rehabilitation and mental health counseling, education can help to reduce the crime and recidivism rate even more effectively. Despite knowing the benefits of these programs, these are not necessarily the main resources the government giving money to in turn for the prison system. The government focuses more on spending money to punish the prisoners than rehabilitate them in order to reduce crime further in the future. While numerous studies have hinted at a positive correlation between visitations and a reduced recidivism rate, a 2008 study published in the Journal of Research and Crime and Delinquency by William D. Bells and Daniel P. Mears found that among inmates who were visited, the odds of recidivism were 30.7% lower than the odds for those who were not visited. Beyond looking at the direct connection between simply visitations and recidivism rates, the study also looked at the frequency of visits. Bells and Mears also found that the amount of visitation was also associated with reduced recidivism. For each additional visit an inmate received, the odds declined by 3.8% more. This study furthers the idea that it is crucial for inmates to have a strong support system and a healthy connection to the outside world in order to have a better chance of re-entering society upon release. This study by Bells and Mears strongly relates to one done in the Netherlands that reviewed how effective intervention plans were at reducing reincarceration rates. This study was included in a 2013 publication of the European Journal of Probation by J. Bosker, C. Whitman, and J. Hermans. And this study defined two basic concepts: social capital, which relates to an individual's personal relationships and the obligations and expectations that go along with them, and human capital, which includes the skills and knowledge, such as education, that is supportive for finding a job. This study links together here because Bells and Mears' study explained that there is a positive correlation between placing an important social capital and reducing reincarceration rate. However, the Netherlands study finds that when making intervention plans, a greater importance is placed on human capital than social capital. In reality, both human capital and social capital should have rather equal importance placed on them when creating intervention plans for inmates, because both have ties to reducing reincarceration rates. Beyond social interactions, education has been found to have a strong connection with reducing reincarceration rates. However, it has also been found that there are great personal benefits for inmates that go along with receiving higher education in prison beyond simply reducing reincarceration rate. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Correctional Education by Emily Pelletier and Douglas Evans found that when inmates took part in higher education courses, they reported that they had a more positive self-esteem, felt they were surrounded by a more positive social group of other inmates who wanted to better themselves through education, and believed getting a job was easier because the education provided new opportunities and a solution to the gap in their resumes. This again relates to the understanding of the personal needs of inmates. While providing education does offer great benefits, such as assisting in finding a source of income upon release, it also helps the inmates on a more personal level by encouraging positive social interactions between them. However, providing educational programs is not the only type of program that is beneficial to reducing reincarceration rates. There are a number of additional programs that are essential to inmates, such as substance abuse rehabilitation and reentry programs. Focusing on reentry programs, there are a wide variety of these types of programs that vary in when they start assisting inmates, before visits upon being released, and what services they offer. Some programs only help with finding a job, while others assist with that as well as finding housing and more. In a 2012 study published in Social Work Research by Noah Wyckoff, Donald M. Lindhorst, and Nicole Morani, it was found that participants in a 6-month reentry program that offered assistance with multiple different services and provided monetary compensation were 42.2% less likely to recidivate when compared to individuals who chose to not be a part of the program. While there is a very large difference between the rates of those who chose to take part in the program and those who did not, something that an importance needs to be placed on is the fact that not all inmates are offered an opportunity to take part in reentry programs. and this needs to change considering the nearly 50% decrease in risk of reincarceration of those who did take part in the program. In order to reduce the reincarceration rate in the U.S., a larger focus needs to be placed on the needs of inmates in terms of both their needs in prison and when they are released. By not just fixing the problem of overcrowding in prisons, but also reducing the occupancy amount in prisons altogether, a larger focus can be placed on individual inmates and addressing what is necessary for them to correct their previous behavior. For example, when prisons or populations are reduced, more focus can be placed on ensuring that an inmate who has been placed in prison due to drug use is attending drug addiction classes and not having illegal drugs smuggled in. Also, when we alter the way inmates are treated while in prison, we change the way they behave upon release. If we treat them kindly and encourage them to make positive changes in prison, they will reflect the positive attitude shown to them upon release. Furthermore, more emphasis needs to be placed on re-entry programs and self-betterment programs, such as education and drug rehabilitation in prisons. All prisons need to provide programs to focus on providing services to aid inmates while they are in prison. These services should include, but not be limited to, substance abuse rehabilitation and educational courses which help to lessen the number of risk factors that can lead to these inmates being sent back to prison. Inmates also need to have healthy relationships throughout the duration of their imprisonment from multiple sources. It's important that the inmates have positive relationships with guards and fellow inmates to ensure that they make the correct behavior modifications that result in their straying from criminal behavior while in prison to lessen the chances of them reverting back to that behavior upon release. Furthermore, having healthy relationships with individuals outside of the prisons help inmates to have a more successful reentry process because they have those connections to the outside world while still in prison. The United States' high reincarceration rate is a reflection of the poor conditions inmates are forced to live in while in prison, and the lack of services to aid inmates in bettering themselves while in prison, and upon release, which increases the risk of inmates reverting back to criminal behavior. Lowering recidivism has been found to be the product of providing educational programs to inmates and encouraging visitations. In order to lower the United States reincarceration rate, a larger importance needs to be placed on needs of inmates, ranging from having personal space rather than being in overcrowded prisons to providing rehabilitation services for substance abuse, as well as encouraging positive social circles for the inmates. When we treat these inmates more humanely, they feel more like humans, and they don't act like criminals when they're released. They act like civil humans.